world famous poet. You want the tabloid hack?
Exactly.
So could you both tell us a bit about what you're doing at the Wright Festival today?
A poetry performance with children year 3 and 4, I think they were, from local schools. That was for about an hour, and they came and I told them stories and poems. And then in a few minutes' time, the great Kevin Maguire from a national newspaper of high repute is going to have a little chat with me, and I might ask him a few questions as well. We never know, it's going to be a conversation. Then we're going to take questions from the floor, and part of it is about my work, maybe about my autobiography, maybe about some other things, but it's up to Kevin really.
It'll be all that. It'll be the poetry and the performance and the writing and your life and politics and your views on everything, the royal family to Jeremy Corbyn. But I saw all the kids coming out from the school, and they were all just beaming and very happy, and they clearly enjoyed it. And like, you bring poetry alive, and too many of us, well, in my generation when I was at school, poetry was sort of forced into you, and all the joy was taken out of it when it's just a brilliant form of expression and communication.
It is. Yeah, indeed.
Which writers were most influential to you both?
For me, it was a mixture of writers, write novels, poets, and also storytellers and comedians. So it was like a mixture. So I was born in 1946, so the kind of people that we would see on telly or hear on the radio who were storytellers, names that don't mean much nowadays, but there was a film actor and writer called Peter Ustinov, who had a tremendous way of telling stories that you didn't know quite whether they were all true or not, or whether he had decorated a bit. My dad was like that. Something would happen in our family, and then he would embellish it, and I'd realise that he had actually made up some of it. And friends would come over, and he'd say, "Oh, that time when," and he'd tell the story, and I'd know he was lying, and it was just great. It was wonderful, and I'd see them laugh, and I'd think, "Oh, yeah, great." When I was a teenager, it sounds immensely pretentious, but I'm sorry about this, but I read James Joyce. And James Joyce, particularly Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, it's a wonderful book because his language changes as he gets older. And I just thought, I mean, it's kind of obvious to everybody who's ever read any books by him knows that, but it just at the time, it just seemed so amazing. And then I read Ulysses, and I just thought, what an incredible way to write. And then alongside that, I was reading American poetry. My dad was born in America, was in the American Army, and he came back, it was quite legal, but he came back with hundreds of books because he was a teacher in the American Army. And you never knew of American poets in England at this time, in the 50s and 60s. They were invisible. You only ever read English poets and great English poets, English literature, but the American poets had broken through the barrier of formal poetry, and they wrote in a very informal way. People like Carl Sandburg, Kenneth Freering, these people, they were able to write in a very informal, conversational way and use cinema as their imagery. And this was all before the Liverpool poets, McGough, Henry and Patton came on the scene. And I was reading this stuff and thinking, oh, I didn't know you could write in a spoken voice, or as if spoken voice. So the combination of the writing that showed that writing wasn't as fixed as it had been when I read as a child, and poetry that could be in a kind of spoken voice, and then storytelling from somebody like Peter Ustinov, and that was the sort of crucible, if you like, for the kind of way in which I write.
James Joyce was too hard for me. I tried. Can you do a nice, quick, easy version for me?
Well, Portrait of the Artist is quite accessible, and Dubliners, though every time I read Dubliners I don't understand it, but I do take, which is a set of short stories. I don't know whether you've ever read them, but they were sort of they're the kind of grandparents of the modern short story, and they're either about nothing or they're about a lot. I'm not quite sure which. Yeah.
I liked George Orwell, very simple, very political. Life in the 1930s, really, into the 40s, Animal Farm, and 1984, of course, Road to Wigan Pier, Down and Out Paris and London, Keep the Aspidistra Flight there. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Can you tell us why you wanted to write specifically for children?
It's kind of a double thing, really. What happened was that I was writing stuff about my childhood, which I thought would be for adults. I didn't have a children's audience in mind, but I was writing about my childhood. And I'd done a play that had gone on at the Royal Court, and then I tried that publisher who had published the play, and they weren't interested. And then somebody said, well, maybe a children's publisher might be interested. Mm-hmm. So I gave it to them, and they said, oh, right, yes, that's interesting. And so suddenly these poems that I'd thought were for adults suddenly became for children, and I was quite confused by that. But then the children's book world is so welcoming in terms of when you bring out a children's book, there's immediately people knocking on your door saying, come and read in this library, come and read in this school. It's like, it's a bit difficult to describe, but I had no idea of this, and so doors just suddenly opened, and then suddenly I'm in front of 20 kids here, 30 kids there, an assembly here, and I suddenly thought, oh, I could do a bit more like this. And so that new audience sort of then propelled me into writing more and trying out things, and then meeting more and more children's writers and reading more and more children's books, and then studying children's literature for an MA and then a PhD and all that. And it sort of, it just drew me in, really.
Do you think it's any more difficult now to write with children? To write for children, you know, now that they have technology and maybe grow up a bit faster, does that change the way you approach it, or is it just pretty much the same?
But difficult to say, really. I mean, some books just, I mean, they sell millions. You know, take David Walliams and his books. You know, and there's a very popular, funny comedian, and then he's got a fantastic ear and very clever, and he's just got the vein. He's just dead right. If you'd said 10 years ago David Walliams would sell, you know, 20, 30, 40 million books, you'd go, really? What, for children? Really? Doesn't he do rather risque double entendre stuff? And the books are nothing like that at all. And he's found, it's so brilliant, he's found a voice inside him that can talk to children. And he's got a kid now, and that's just brilliant. So he's found it, I won't say easy, that's a silly thing to say, but he's found a facility to do it, so it can't be impossible. Do you know what I mean? Even in the face of what everyone calls, you know, technology, digital stuff and all the rest of it. So he's found a way to do it. And there are many others, you know, if you take Patrick Ness and A Monster Calls, I mean, this is a giant of a book. I mean, this is just superb for any age of person. You know, this is about a massive crisis in a young lad whose mum is dying. That's a book for all ages, all time, and he's found a vehicle and a way of doing it. And the film is just superb as well. And you think, well, that speaks to everybody.
Reading at the moment.
I'm supposed to be writing a non-fiction book about play, the meaning of play and so on. And then sort of more on the creative side, I've done a kind of memoir about what happened to my family during the war, which is partly based on the last chapter in my adult memoir, but this is for children to sort of explain how the Holocaust impacted on ordinary people living in France, because my father's uncles lived in France.
And for you?
I'm reading a very good book called Nazi Terrors by somebody called Matthew Collins, about a guy called Robbie Mullen, who was a mole inside an organisation called National Action, a very far-right extremist organisation, and they were going to assassinate a Labour MP called Rosie Cooper, but the guy turned the whistleblower, and it's real life. It's quite chilling. It's about how they save lives in the end. Who do you like then?
I like all types of books, really. I'm trying to write a young adult novel at the moment, so I'm reading a lot of young adult books and children's literature.
I'm going to nick some of your questions as well, because they're very good for all in conversation.